out there. Welcome to another edition of Booty and Baribeau. He's Josh Booty. I'm Rachel Baribeau. We don't even know what week it is in college football. We jest. But it's getting near the end of the season and so close to the end of the season that Josh, next week, the College Football Playoff Committee joins in a room, not the BCS, the College Football, I lost my voice there, the College Football Playoff Committee joins in a room, all 13 esteemed members, and they will start to release rankings on the Final Four.
I can't wait to see it. You know, we are deep into the season, and there's a lot of teams now. There's 12 unbeatens left in all of college football. There's 8 in the Power 5 conferences. So there's some really good football being played out there by some teams, and they've been consistent, over the long haul. And now, some of these teams like LSU and Clemson and Ohio State and these Baylor and TCU, these teams are really going to have to show their worth the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, because this is a lot of their meats of their schedule are coming up. I know for a TCU team, they've got to play Baylor and Oklahoma, and so does Baylor. They have to play Oklahoma and TCU, and all these teams are very good. So we're going to see some of these teams get knocked off, and to see what the BCS comes out with after this weekend is going to be really interesting. And I don't know who your number one team is now, but last week Ohio State did a really good job with JT Barrett, and I think they're starting to look again like the team to beat.
Yeah, old habits die hard, Josh Booty. You keep calling it the BCS. I love it because
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
That's what we had for so many years.
You're right. The way that it's done now is better, and I'm so happy with the way that the playoff has happened and jump started this whole playoff stuff, the NCAA. But yeah, I go back to the BCS. That's what we've known for so many years, and a lot of people still call it that, and I guess I just have I keep calling it that.
All right, Josh. I tweeted on Saturday afternoon, if you saw this score coming between Tennessee and Alabama, raise your hand. And then in parentheses, I put, nobody better raise their hand, because no one saw that coming.
Yeah, Alabama, they didn't play super solid on offense. I think, Coker to me makes the game look a little more difficult than I would like him to make it look. He does make mistakes. He'll have some streaks where he's a gritty player. He wants to be good. He's a tall, strong-armed quarterback, but it just doesn't look like the game comes real easy to him, and that bothers me because Alabama's got some big games coming up, and I think for Saban and what he does he wants to do offensively with their identity and the way that Lane Kiffin calls plays, they want a quarterback that can be super sharp and super efficient. And I don't think Coker. I think if you were to list the quarterbacks in the SEC top to bottom, Coker's kind of in the middle. I don't think he's a top tier SEC quarterback at this point. I mean, we talked about it in the last podcast. Just think if Dak Prescott was playing for Alabama. I mean, Alabama would not. They would be number one and have most all the votes nationally for that number one position. I mean, that's the dynamic ability that Prescott brings to the table at Mississippi State. He's carrying that ball club. Coker's not the guy. He cannot do that. And so they've got to do the things that they do well, and they've got to give the ball to Derrick Henry, and Ridley has become a real super threat downfield, and that's just huge for Kiffin and Coker because he's going to need them.
All right, so many storylines surrounding this Alabama-Tennessee game. But before we get into storylines, I have to tell you, Josh Booty, before we started this podcast, I said if I had a cigar, I would smoke it on this podcast with you, because you sent me pictures. I sent you pictures of post-game of all the celebration that was going on in that Alabama locker room.
Well, it's a big game to win. I mean, both teams needed it bad. Alabama has been against the wall since the loss at Ole Miss. Dobbs did a tremendous job running and passing the football, and really played a stellar game. Tennessee missed a field goal or two that really hurt them, and Tennessee had a real chance to win. So, Alabama deserved to smoke cigars. I mean, it was a big win for them. They move on. They have a bye week this week. Saban, I did send you a picture of Saban smoking a cigar and hanging out with his running back Derrick Henry after the game. But that's the kind of Nick Saban I like. I think we all can relate to that kind of Nick Saban. We always see him in the light as being a tough, hard-nosed football coach, but he's got a real soft side to him and a fun side to him, and I think that's what he didn't really have that early in his career, and he's beginning to show some of those signs later in his career, and he's becoming more of a player coach, and everybody loves to see what Saban does, and he had some fun with that situation.
Did you see shades of that when you played for him at LSU, or was he just tough and hard-nosed, or were there moments of tenderness there? I don't know if tender is the right word, but...
Their tenderness might be a weird word for Saban, but I think off the field, yes, you do see that he's very personable. You can go into his office; he'll shoot you straight. He invites you to do things. I went over to his house when I was making a decision whether to go pro or stay my senior year at LSU. He offered to go up and see my family, and we flew on the plane that LSU provided him, and we got to spend, I don't know, all day together going up to Shreveport. And when we landed in my hometown of Shreveport, which is about an hour flight from Baton Rouge, I had a couple buddies that wanted to say hello to Saban that were big LSU guys. And so I'd arranged something where we could go by one of my buddies' offices and walk through the office and meet 4 or 5 guys that were just my friends from back home, and they had always wanted to meet Nick Saban, and that's what he did. He goes, let's do it, man. Let's go by there and see him. And so we just had a fun day where we had lunch and we hung out with my buddies and we did some fun things. And I think that's why Saban does so good in recruiting, because he can relate to families, he can relate to people, he can relate to mom and dad, he can relate to brothers and of family members of these big time recruits, and that's what he does such a good job doing.
You're right, and see, this is why I love doing this podcast with you, and I know that's why people love watching and listening to this podcast, to get that insight, to get that behind the scenes story of your personal experience with him. And I know, covering him at Alabama through 2 national championships and lived through a tornado there and watched the effect that it had on that team as well. I saw how much he loves Miss Terry, his wife, and he'll tell you all day long, she rules the roost, she picks out the clothes, she tells him which way to go and back, and he'd be lost without her. And he really did soften when he had a grandchild, and I thought that was, it was neat. And he told me one time when I was there early in my career, there covering Alabama, he said, I think I'm often misunderstood, and one day I think people will see a different side of me.
Yeah, he really is a good guy. And, there's a lot of things that he does that I probably wouldn't coach myself like he does, because he's so tough on his coaches and his players. And over the years, he's probably lightened up a little bit because of his success and the position that he's in on the national scene now that he wasn't in when he first got to LSU and I played for him. No one really knew who Nick Saban really was when we hired him from Michigan State. But, he wears his feelings on his sleeve, and that's why we all enjoy watching him on TV on the sideline or in his press conferences, because he tells it like it is. He wears his feelings on his sleeve, and he's fun to watch. He's an emotional coach. He really has passion for what he's doing. And if all these coaches were like Nick Saban, we'd have better football, because he cares so much about the game.
You mentioned coaches, Josh, and there is a possibility that Alabama and Nick Saban will lose up to 3 coordinators, 2 to 3. But there are 3 coordinators that are being mentioned on hot lists across the country. And we know, Josh, that's a sign of a very successful program when you have people coming and calling for your coordinators. But he's managed to keep them together there for a bit. But Mario Cristobal, his offensive line coach, is one of the front runners for the Miami job. He knows the area. He's obviously very familiar with the U. Not only that, but his defensive coordinator, Kirby Smart, is, if not the front runner, just top guy, Josh, for the South Carolina job. And then I'm hearing even Lane Kiffin being mentioned for this Miami job.
Yeah, there's he's every year. A lot of like Lane Kiffin, for instance, the best thing he did for himself was to go be a coordinator for a Nick Saban coach team, because what does he do? He learns a lot about being a successful, ultra successful head coach, the demands of Saban and what he puts on you as a staff. and then you grow up and mature and learn a lot about defense. Like Lane Kiffin's an offensive guy. What has he done spending 2 or 3 years with Saban? He's learned a lot about defense because he spent countless hours with Saban and Nick Saban in team meeting rooms with his staff. I mean, so Saban's a different guy coming out of, if he comes out and away from Alabama, than he was coming in. So Saban does that for coaches. He, at LSU, we had Jimbo Fisher, we had Derek Dooley, we had Will Muschamp, we had Bo Pelini, we had Mike Hayward. There was a lot of guys that became bigger name guys later down the road, and it's just like a school of football staffing. It's crazy what he does. And again, he's got 3 or 4 that could be coaches anywhere in the country because of their time, and they see how much effort and passion he has, and the way he recruits is just a wonderful deal for a coach to be in a system like that.
It's funny. You talked about the school. It's a fraternity. These college football coaches. It's a coaching tree. They all know each other. They're talking. They're friends. They were college roommates. I mean, it's crazy, this coaching tree of not only Saban but Belichick. I mean, you go back to these amazing different coaches out there, and the coaching tree that they have, and the legacy that they pay forward on college football.
They do. Saban he's such a great coach, and we talk so much about him, but he deserves everything that people say about him because he works that hard. He overworks. He over prepares. There's not a lot of situations that come up during ball games that he's not prepared for. We see what Belichick does on Sundays, and what they were so prepared for the Jets and all their blitzes. And Saban's just like that. He's just like Belichick, but on an NCAA level. And so he, with the time that they do get with his players, he gets the most out of it. And I think that's why Alabama's always at the top.
All right, it's no secret how much I like this kid in a totally platonic way. But so much, I think the absolute world of him as a human being. I think the world of him as an athlete. You know who I'm going to say, Josh Booty.
Dak Prescott. It's that good. The kid's that good. He's carrying a team on his shoulders in a conference that's the toughest of all the conferences.
Absolutely. And his performance against Kentucky on Saturday night, 6 touchdowns, putting his team on his back.
300 passing, over 100 rushing. Ridiculous.
Just ridiculous. And I asked you 2 weeks ago when we were in Baton Rouge together, if you thought that he had improved his draft status. Has that? And you said yes. And I think you said, like 3rd or 4th round, something like that. Do you think after a performance like Saturday night that he even elevates himself even higher?
I do. I think it only can help him when he has performances like that. That's a big time performance in an SEC matchup when he has to take over the whole game. Dan Mullen is even surprised at how well the kid's playing. How well he's throwing the football, his decision making. He does tuck it and run when he needs to. He was their leading rusher. He's been their leading rusher throughout the season. In terms of yardage and things that he's doing offensively are just incredible. So to see Dak Prescott progress as a passer, and I think that's where he wanted to get better this offseason, and he knew that the demands of him were going to be a lot greater this year because they lost so many great players, and Josh Robinson, the great tailback last year that they had. So he was going to have to be that guy, and he is that guy. You know what? They've got a great record. They're gonna be in a big time bowl game. I have them going to the Peach Bowl. That's just what I think that they're going to do, and they're going to make it tough on a lot of teams down the stretch here. He's that good of a ball player, and he reminds me a lot of Tim Tebow, except a much better passer. Okay,
there's a couple of teams that they played a game on Saturday night. That's Ole Miss and Texas A&M, and you had a tweet late on Saturday night that lit up the Twittersphere.
Yeah,
and the tweet said, I've got Ole Miss winning it all, facing Florida in the SEC championship. With their remaining schedule, you really think Ole Miss has got what it takes to go down that schedule unscathed?
If they play like they did against Texas A&M, their defense was just stifling. And I think because they have LSU at home and they've got the biggest win in college football this year with that road win at Bryant-Denny Stadium against Saban and Bama. I think that they have a great chance. Now, I know they lost to Memphis, and that hurt them bad in the polls. But I think if they can get healthy and stay healthy, they've got the best quarterback of all the one-loss teams in college football. I think, if you look at what they've done, what they did with A&M, and that's given up 3 points against an offense, Kevin Sumlin offense, that always puts a bunch of points on the board and have threats all over the field. You got to say that they're deserving of where they're at right now, other than being that they lost to Memphis. No one could figure that out, but Memphis is having a great team. They're a top 20 team. But if Ole Miss beats LSU at home, they control their own destiny, and I think that they have a chance to win out and go to the SEC championship game. They've got the edge over Bama because of that big win.
I think there's a lot of football yet to be played, but I do want to, before we end this podcast, we got some great guests coming up this week, so stay tuned. And for just an update, you can now get our podcast, all of our podcasts, if you go to gridironnow.com/Booty and Baribeau. So if you miss one, go ahead and put that in your phone, gridironnow.com/Booty and Baribeau. We've got some great guests coming up this week. But what in the world is going on with Texas A&M? Jake Spavital looked lost on Saturday there in the Grove. The young quarterback, Kyle Allen, looked lost. You had announcers publicly wondering why they didn't go to Kyler Murray. I mean, and a lot of blame is being put on Kevin Sumlin this week, and just saying the team looks lost. I read one piece, Josh, that said it looked as if the team took separate planes. Like each member of the team, they just weren't on the same page.
I think Rach is they've run into two buzzsaws. They ran into Alabama and Ole Miss. I think those are the two best defenses in all of college football, except for maybe Ohio State. I mean, you've got a team that's got a young quarterback, and they've got gifted receivers, but they're young. You talk about Christian Kirk. You talk about Speedy Noel. You talk about Ricky Seals-Jones. I mean, those guys are great players, but they haven't played a ton together. Christian Kirk's a freshman that's got 6 games in, and he's their stud receiver. I mean, so I think they ran into an Ole Miss buzzsaw. Alabama ran into the Ole Miss buzzsaw and threw 3 picks in week 3 or 4 of the season. I mean, so they had to play Alabama and Ole Miss, and they got beat, and they couldn't produce much offensively. I think they're not ready for those situations yet. And when they don't move the ball offensively, what does it do? It puts their back against the wall defensively, and both those teams, Alabama and Ole Miss, can hurt you offensively. I really like the way Chad Kelly's playing, and that's why I said Ole Miss is the team to beat right now in the SEC West.
Yeah, I got on that Chad Kelly hype train after the Alabama game, and then a bunch of people said, "Oh, too soon, Rachel, too soon." But if you look at him in the Memphis game, statistically, he wasn't bad in that Memphis game. It was their defense, and they had a bunch of injuries that were unable to stop Memphis.
Yeah, Ole Miss, Kandichi was out last week, and they still won that game against A&M. Guys stepped up. Marquise Haynes had 2 sacks. He was a big playmaker, defensive end for Ole Miss last week. But the guys just continue to step up, and if they get healthy, they've got the best players. They're not the deepest team, but they have some of the best players in the SEC on their squad. And I think the way that Kelly plays at quarterback, he's really quick with everything he does, and he gets the ball out. He's got great feet in the pocket, and he can make moves. He can beat you outside the pocket as well. So I really like the way he's playing. If he stays consistent and doesn't turn the ball over, Ole Miss's offense with Laquan Treadwell and the players that they do have, and with Tunsil back at left tackle, they're going to be, I'm telling you, really tough to beat.
I was laughing earlier, and I didn't want any of the Texas A&M fans that are out there watching to think she's laughing at our troubles. I was laughing because there was a tweet that it was as if it was John Chavis talking, and he said, "What? I came here because where's the points? You said you could score points."
That's funny because that's really why he took that job. He knew he had Myles Garrett and Hall and some of these great players on defense, but he knew Sumlin could put up a bunch of points. And And it's fun to play defense and when you can pin your ears back because you know you're scoring on offense and you can just, go after the quarterback. I think he got tired of the way Les Miles called plays at LSU, and they were so predictable. And I think he was just wanting that up-tempo offense and to coach defense on a team like that. So, I think that they just ran into two buzzsaws, exactly what we said.